Welcome back to the County News Podcast. I'm Nicole Weissman, and this week we have a special conversation focused on NACo celebrating its 90th anniversary. NACo was founded, though under a different name, in 1935, and this year at our annual conference in Philadelphia in just a few days, we'll be celebrating NACo at 90. In the lead up to that, my co-host and County News digital editor and senior writer, and now, as he continues to add hats, author of the new NACo at 90 book, Charlie Ban, sat down with NACo Executive Director Matt Chase recently to talk about some key highlights from the book, some excellent moments from the NACo at 90 story. Take a listen.
Charlie, you've spent really almost the last year writing a book on the history of NACo, and manuscripts here, and talk to us a little bit about this book that you found and we'll have available upstairs called The Dark Continent of American Politics.
So this is the first, or at least the earliest academic work I've seen on county government from 1917, and it really describes a style of county governance that we really don't recognize at this point. When you talk about limited government, that really was what was represented here, and it reflects the changes that county government has gone through over the last 108 years. A lot of the functions that we just assume are part of everybody's county weren't really part of the repertoire back then. So it reflects the changes that took place in government over the throughout the Great Depression and the New Deal and Great Society. Basically, as county governments have met the persistent moments in American history over the last 108 years.
So as we get ready for our 90th annual conference here in Philadelphia in July, the nation will also be beginning to start to kick off early stages of the country's 250th celebration. So we're marrying up the 250th kickoff with our 90th. Talk to us about the early days of NACo and why did county officials come together? What was the context of why they came together to form this association?
Well, and this is something that's lost often in the day-to-day work that we do, but NACo is, and always has been, a member-driven organization. For the first 22 years of our existence, we were entirely a member-driven organization because we had no staff at all. It was a relatively loose confederation of county officials of all different types. We had a lot more representation from county engineers and public works, but there wasn't really much coordination among county officials nationwide before 1935. You had some state associations that had been around since the 19th century, but really counties were not represented on the federal level at all. So this was the first attempt to enter the intergovernmental partnership that was developing quickly as social service demands increased during the Great Depression. Counties found themselves meeting a lot of these needs, sometimes for the first time on that scale. So county officials were seeing opportunities for organization and really getting on the same page for what they needed from the federal government to help meet the needs of their citizens.
So our first president was actually a county clerk.
He was.
What happened at our first 2 or 3 annual meetings? And again, these people were taking trains, they were taking long, slow car rides. But what happened the first couple of meetings?
Well, you saw an early surge of interest in 1935, 36, and 37. And like you said, people were sometimes they were chartering entire trains with some of their local regional county officials to make it worth their while to come out to places like, I think, Rock Island County, Illinois, places that were central but took a while to reach at that age.
Ogden, Utah.
Ogden, Utah was actually the NACo's rebound, because Rock Island County in Illinois, they were hoping for a big turnout. They got 50 people, and that was nearly the end for us. so the members, including some who didn't even show up to that conference, I think they sent out about 50,000 invitations to different county officials across the country, and county and some state officials, trying to get some kind of surge of interest. And in Ogden, Weber County, Utah, Ogden, they managed to miraculously hit a pretty good comeback. And that's the fact that we had enough people showing up to put their time and their money where their mouth was on county organization really kind of fueled NACo or National Association of County Officers, as it was known at the time, for where we were going next.
Well, I think that's an important point. We were called the National Association of County Officers, and at that point, the county government wasn't the member; it was the individuals. Talk to us about how we really started as a subscription service and why.
At the time, in the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s, it was illegal for county governments to spend public money on association memberships. And we had a workaround, which was if you subscribed to a newsletter that NACo put out, that counted as your membership. And it kind of became almost a travelogue magazine for a while. A lot of promotional materials for different states. Each state would essentially sponsor an issue of the magazine, and if you could sell advertising, that was the cherry on top. But basically, just trying to fund some type of organization, the only way you could do that was through a subscription. So, and later on, that became an information service subscription until about 1958, when we could switch things around a little bit and make it legal for counties to associate formally.
So through our 90 years, we've had World War II, Korean War, Cold War, Vietnam War, energy crisis of the 70s, 80s with the fall of the Soviet Union, 9/11, COVID. Tell us some of the interesting stories, maybe about the Cuban Missile Crisis or other times where counties have really truly been on the front lines with our federal and state partners at really critical moments in world history.
Well, mentioning the Cuban Missile Crisis, that was kind of the first chance NACo really got to show its prominence in the intergovernmental relationship. That was soon after we started hiring full-time staff, so we had a full-time presence in DC, and given the civil defense crisis facing the country, county officials were invited into the Pentagon for briefings on how to handle different eventualities if things didn't go well with diplomatic relations. So that really, the counties being part of that discussion was really the first opportunity to see NACo on the level that we were hoping at that age, at the age of our development.
So I think, at least for me, and I think you share this thought, the great part of this project was the characters of NACo. Talk to us. So you interviewed almost every living past president, over 25, I believe, some going back to the 80s even. Talk to us about some of the characters that we have had over the years.
One of my favorite NACo presidents' greetings every day, when you ask him how he's doing, he'd say, "It's the best day of my life." That was Larry Johnson from DeKalb County, Georgia. And the enthusiasm he brought to the role, it was infectious. And you could see that in his recruiting in Georgia counties to get them to be a 100% state. But you also saw him stepping out of his comfort zone. Something like the congressional delegation visit to Utah. Larry Johnson had never been out. He had not spent that much time out in public lands counties, getting to know how they worked, the issues they faced. And a few months later, when we were at the WIR conference, he had a cowboy hat. He was going native, and because he couldn't do anything less than 100% as he approached the job. And that, you saw a lot of people bring different approaches to the presidency, but that enthusiasm really kind of fires you up in a way that that you didn't think was possible until you saw him in action. Oh my God! I got to go visit Sandy Smoley in California. She was our president 83, 84, just following a crisis that nearly bankrupted NACo, and she leveraged her personal relationship with Ronald Reagan to bring in his re-election campaign as a taking 2 floors of the building that we were in charge of leasing out, because when she was in office as I believe the only Republican member of the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors, she wound up being the official Reagan would meet with when he was governor, and that ended up paying dividends to keep us in business.
And that's a great example of using crisis for an opportunity, where NACo had the worst lease in the history of Washington, D.C. real estate that literally almost bankrupted the organization, combined with that administration at that time cut all the grants to state and local associations, and yet we stayed afloat by bringing in that administration's campaign to rent floors from us. And that is politics at its finest, and really creativity at its finest.
Looking at that period in NACo's development, I'm not sure if anybody here is a big Dante fan, but the opening cantos of Inferno, halfway through his life's journey, he lost his path in the forest, and basically halfway through NACo's development, we nearly went bankrupt because of this building. But in the process of recovering from that, we leaned on our friends, our members. Our members basically loaned us basically a year's dues to keep us going.
And when you say members, and by the way, when he says building, not the building we're in today, a different building, but individual county officials actually lent their own personal money. This wasn't just county money. Plus, David Davenport and Nationwide lent us money.
Yeah.
But this was members' personal money.
And state associations, every state association lent us $10,000 to help just survive, to make payroll. And it really demonstrated that we'd built some relationships over those first 40 or so years. And without that goodwill that we had built in the process, we wouldn't have made it. And I think that certainly informs a lot of our approach to making sure that members feel valued. They're not just sending us checks. They are part of every step of our policy development process.
So we talked about the 80s being a tough time, but we came out of that. And with the leadership of the new executive director, Larry NACo, who had worked here as a lobbyist, went to California to be CSAC executive director, the California State Association of Counties, came back, and he actually came back and forth a couple times. But talk about the resurgence and what really happened there and why, and who were some of the characters involved in that.
So we survived the 80s. We had a few years to stabilize after 82, and then managed to get back into the county programming. Don't worry, Ashley. We got back into county program at one point. And then in 1991, Larry came back, and he had a vision for financial growth. And he brought along with him his plan for cooperative purchasing, which you'll hear a little bit about today from Edge on PPP, but the NACo Financial Services Corporation really took a look at how we could be more than we could offer not just NACo but our members some financial independence and stability in terms of finding ways we could use our economies of scale with our membership to make it easier and cheaper to buy the materials and everything counties needed to fulfill their obligations to their constituency. And that ability to fund our own programming took us from surviving to thriving, as they say. And he brought with him Steve Swendeman, who succeeded Larry as a CSAC executive director, and said, "You want to build something nationwide? Here's your chance." And Steve Steve really attacked that. Basically, lived on the road for a few years as he made contacts with state associations and counties, just trying to get people on board to build their own stability. And he ended up in good fun pitting Los Angeles County and Fairfax County against each other to see who could do more business through the FSC and win more contracts and ultimately benefit everybody in the organization. But brought that friendly rivalry to the fore that really kind of powered what FSC did and got us to the point where it's something we're doing now on our own.
Yeah. And so just go back to a little bit more in the history. We've had a lot of presidents, vice presidents, speakers of the House, and others. What are some of the fun stories with Nixon and JFK and Barry Goldwater and some of those historical moments with U.S. presidents?
So Goldwater had actually committed to our 1964 conference about a year out, well before he was the nominee for the Republican nomination for president in '64, and he had announced that he wasn't going to be doing any. He was going to focus on the campaign once he secured the nomination and really work on that, and he wouldn't be giving any remarks. And one of our officers reached out and said, "Congratulations, but I'm sorry you won't be joining us." And he said, "You know what? I'm coming. I said I was going to come a year ago. I'm going to show up." And sure enough, he basically launched his general election campaign at a NACo conference. Same thing with Nixon and Kennedy in 1960. They laid out their visions for how counties and the federal government would interact early in their campaigns, and in the end, both administrations ended up being very, very cooperative with NACo, both in terms of what we mentioned before, being part of the Cuban Missile Crisis preparations, but also Nixon was part of our push for general revenue sharing in the early 70s, which up until ARPA in 2021 was the biggest achievement that county governments had reached in federal legislation. And it also helped that Nixon picked a former county executive as his running mate in Spiro Agnew, who had been the Baltimore County executive before serving as governor. But we've managed to be involved basically from the 60s on in that conversation when the federal government, when people running for federal office think about how they're going to approach different levels of government, they considered counties because of the work we'd been doing. It also helped that we had a former county official in the White House from 45 to 52 when Harry Truman rose to the presidency. But we went a few years without a president until President Trump came in 2020, and then three straight years with President Biden from 22 to 24. I'd say we're back on the map with presidents.
Well, one of the best stories, I think, there's so many that are in the book that are so good, but Hubert Humphrey was a senator and running for president, and he came, and when the president comes in modern times, we always stress because it actually costs us extra money. We have to actually pay the Secret Service, we have to pay for the magnetometers. NACo carries that burden, not the Secret Service or the federal government. And there's a great story that you tell about Hubert Humphrey coming in one of the more expensive cities with union labor, and they were negotiating over a spotlight and how much the spotlight would cost. It was going to cost $10,000 to put a spotlight on the speaker. And then it turned out that he needed 2 spotlights, so it was $20,000. And then it turned out there was union labor, and so we had to pay overtime. And then he shows up and he says, "I'm not an entertainer, I'm a politician. I don't need no damn spotlight." We still paid, apparently, but apparently he didn't need them. So what were some of the, and we're going to open it up for questions here, but as we literally move the text into design, what's your reflection on this process? Like what are the things you've learned about the organization, about our members, just about navigating change maybe? Like what's the context that you're leaving as you wrap up this book?
that members love it. They love being part of NACo. They love convening. One of the things that surprised me most when we had the quickly organized 2021 conference in Prince George's County, I was shocked that people actually went into meetings and workshops. I thought they would have spent all the time just catching up in the hallways and seeing their counterparts from across the country again. And that really, I don't think that's changed over the last 90 years. It started as, I wouldn't say a social club, but it was a chance for counties to county officials to get together from across the country in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and as we reached maturity as an organization, those relationships remained the glue, because if you don't have people who want to work together on a steering committee, you can't pass policy. If they don't want to share their best practices and let people plagiarize from them, then there are no peer exchanges. So really, without members being happy with what we do, we will quickly become a less effective organization. So just making sure that we listen and respond and advise as we need to, but make sure the members are at the center of what we do.
You know, in my career, I've been blessed. I knew Bernie Hillenbrandt, who was the first executive director in NACo, and I actually worked for Bernie's wife, and that's a story I'll tell off camera because she worked at NACo at a time too. But Bernie grew up in poverty in Syracuse, New York, was sent to World War II at 17 years old, was injured severely in one of the battles, spent 18 months in a hospital, came back, worked for the mayor of Syracuse, came to DC, worked for the American Municipal League, which is now National League of Cities, and eventually became the first employee of NACo. In the desk that is in the 1935 room, people ask what it is. That was actually Bernie's first desk. And we started our humble beginnings in the laundry room of the Mayflower Hotel, which was actually across the street from the actual hotel. And Bernie, in classic fashion, if you knew him, was gregarious and a storyteller and quite the character. But his office was in the laundry room, but he held all of his meetings in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel to impress people. And as the organization evolved and moved out of the laundry room up into another nicer, quote, place, they still use that lobby. And so to see how far we've come is really amazing. So with that, Charlie, just thank you for this journey, and we can't wait to actually be able to read it all and to see all the pictures that go with it. And one of the things that's not in the book, but Bernie passed on to me years ago, and I was actually with him the evening that he died, and he tragically fell later that night in his nursing home and hit his head and passed away. But he had told us why our summer conference is in July. And it was because back in the day, the vast majority of our members were farmers. The vast majority of their spouses were teachers. And so they would plant their crops in the spring, let them grow. They would go to the NACo conference in the summer. Their wives were out of school. And then they would go back in the fall and harvest their crops. And so people always ask, why do we meet in July? Why is it so hot? It actually goes back to our roots and how people used to travel, and it's just never changed. So with that, Charlie, any final comments that you want to make?
If Meredith Moran had not written the entire paper for an issue and a half, I wouldn't have been able to finish writing this, so thank you, Meredith.
All right. Thank you, Meredith. Well, we'll wrap up the podcast there, and we have a couple of minutes for questions from the group. I have to give a speech across the way here, so we'll make sure we stay on time here. But anybody got any comments or questions for Charlie? Speak up.
So what will happen at the annual conference to celebrate this NACo at 90 book project? How do we communicate that out?
What will happen at the annual conference to celebrate NACo at 90?
Yes.
I understand there's a cake.
Yeah. A cake will be involved. Yeah. So
We're going to have a big timeline on, I believe they call it an activation. That's the industry term. We're going to have a long timeline in the exhibit hall, or the grand hall. Some photos. We're still working on a few things, but
so we're producing the book. We will have at least 25 of the 32 living past presidents here. We'll have a dinner with past presidents. We'll have them on the general stage. We are working on some fun activities with them for the whole membership. We are engaging the full membership in the celebration at certain points throughout the conference. But we'll have videos, we'll have the book, we'll have these timelines like a museum exhibit kind of a thing. And every attendee will also get a NACo challenge coin to challenge them to keep us into the future, and some other things like that. Nicole, anything you want to add? Yep. But we will, once we lock it down, we'll make sure we share it with everybody.
we'll tell Leon too, because he's designing all this.
Well, we always tell Leon last.
So in those early years, 1935, 1940, when you talked about sending out invitations, like we didn't have email. So my mind started going to, okay, it was more than the Pony Express, but how did you communicate exactly? Did you cover that at all in terms of how folks communicated that in 1935, 1940?
Yeah.
Essentially through the county officer, which was the county news of its day. I think it was monthly, and we'd usually have
mailed out.
That was mailed out. Very large papers too, or essentially magazines. So that was essentially, it was all through the mail. Funny detail about that 1939 conference in Weber County. They covered it via radio back to the
two-way radio.
Yeah, two-way radio. It was about 45 miles away from Ogden, and the newspaper there covered it via two-way radio. So that was about the extent of the technology used in the process. So yeah, mostly mail.
Okay, I'm picturing the Waltons right now.
Oh, even before that. So, and when Bernie was executive director, he actually had a standard editorial type column in hundreds of newspapers across the country. So just like you would see editorial writers, op-ed writers in the Washington Post or New York Times, Bernie actually had one that was syndicated across the country for the public, in addition to what became county news. And because I did work with Alice Ann and Bernie, when I started my career, we used to actually still, and some of you remember this, we used to actually clip news articles and do news clippings and have to paste things and then copy them. Like that's what they did. And when you look at these old county news, and encourage you to take out the old county news and look through them, it's incredible the quality of just how they packaged all this information.
Everybody wrote. I mean, they've had Friday afternoon work sessions where people just, is this on? Yeah, it's on. Where people would just write about what they had done, not the 5 things you did this week, but essentially what you worked on in your issue area, and they'd package that into the Monday letter and get that off to members and members of Congress to let people know what was going on in the world of county government.
Yep. Got time for one more.
Charlie, thank you so much.
Gregory, one question, not with 10 parts.
One small panel.
Yeah, this is
inside joke. Gregory organized a phenomenal panel at WIR, but it was 9 people, and we have dubbed it the largest panel in the history of mankind.
Did you see any transformation in women coming into office during World War II?
That's a great question.
To men serving in uniform and transition in the county role with women becoming more involved in leadership?
That is a great question.
Great question.
Our member records aren't great from back then. We do have transcripts from our 1944 mid-year war meeting. I'm not seeing a lot of representation, but we do have photos from our 1949 conference, and you see a lot more women there than you would have earlier. So
But beyond that, when you look at the history of NACo presidents, we actually had women and minorities of different types far before our peers. And talk a little bit about that, like maybe Charlotte and some of the other really early pioneers.
I think it was 1972 when Gladys Noon Spellman from Prince George's County was our first woman president. She followed our first Japanese American president 2 years prior, and then Charlotte Williams in 1978-79 was our first African American president. A few months ago, I wrote in our obituary for President Carter. She actually helped him write his Malaise speech, which is probably the most memorable part of his presidency as an orator. But back in the 70s, we were ahead of the curve in terms of government organizations being more diverse and having more representation.
Still sad that it was the 70s, but
yes, it took about 35 years to get to that point. But
so anybody else? Just why don't you join me in thanking Charlie Ban?
thank you.
That was Charlie Ban and Matt Chase in conversation about NACo at 90. Check out the activation in person, get your hands on a copy of the book, and experience other exciting moments related to NACo at 90 at NACo's 90th Annual Conference and Expo, coming up July 11th through the 14th in the city and county of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. For more information, visit naco.org/annual.